What's up, guys? Tyler here. I got Kyle Hall with me,
How you doing, everyone?
and we're going to be talking a little bit about interest rates. So what we're seeing is interest rates have gone up a little bit. They had to, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like
They were at next to nothing for a long time.
during the pandemic, next to
Yeah.
nothing.
Yeah.
And they can't do that long term
Right.
because it's creating some problems with real estate.
Not just real estate, all in every facet of finance and business right now, interest rates are at next to zero, and it causes, you can't just be handing out money for free all the time. So the feds have decided to raise lending interest rates up a little bit, and consequently it's caused a little spike in interest rates for home buyers.
So we just want to kind of put that in context with people so they can understand, like, yes, interest rates on homes have gone up. Yes, it's going to cost a little bit more, but it was bound to happen. They weren't going to stay sub 3s and 3% forever.
Mm-hmm.
So with that said, we're going to talk about, I would still suggest buying. If the interest rate seems a little high to you, I would still suggest buying.
It's hard to communicate to folks that these aren't, because they were so low for so long, it's hard to communicate to folks that this isn't like these are high interest rates, right, Tyler? It's not that these are...
Right, these aren't like astronomically high.
Right.
Like, oh my gosh, I can't afford this.
I would even argue that these are still low at 5%. If you look over the course of history, for a long time, through the 70s and 80s, I mean, interest rates were in the teens, right? And even higher. And in the 90s, the 90s even, it's like 5% is still, when you're looking at the grand scheme of things, a rock bottom interest rate.
Yeah, and so looking historically, I've heard some of my mentors, some more seasoned citizens, if you will, who have gone through some ups and downs, tell me that they bought their first house and the interest rate was like 9%.
9%.
I've heard of like high teen interest
I've heard
rates.
of 14, 15, and something.
17%.
Yeah.
So 5% is still cheap. 5% is still cheap when you look at it in comparison to history. I'm looking at something I shared on Facebook. Another agent a lender had shared this, one of his competitors' ads. Guy's name is Bob Hine. He shares rock bottom rates, 30-year fixed, 11 7/8%, and then 2 points. So I'm assuming, would that be, I don't know if I totally understand how they're interpreting
You'd
2
have
points.
to pay 2 points to get that rate, is what it
So
looks
in
like.
a sense, it's like a 13, almost a 14% interest rate. Ridiculous. Right below that, one of my Facebook friends said, I had graduated mortgage on my first house. I think it was 11%.
So it's, it can be tough when, we have these 2 and 3% interest rates for a little while, and then all of a sudden they go up to somewhere in the ballpark of 5, where they're at right now. You're like, oh my gosh, we've seen it's almost 100% increase in interest rate over just a few short months. It's like, yeah, while that may be true, you look at the bigger picture here and you realize, well, wait a second.
Still good.
Right. These are still great interest rates even.
And here's the thing. Let's say you're a buyer and you're out there and you're renting. 5% is far cheaper
That's nothing, right?
than the 0% you're making
In equity every year.
year on your rental.
Right.
You're paying like an infinite amount of interest
I don't-
on a house you don't live in.
I don't know
Or
if...
own, I'm sorry.
I don't know if there could ever be an interest rate high enough for me not to recommend a rent or buying. Tyler, what do you think? I mean, it'd have to be like in the 20s or something outrageous.
Yeah, it'd have to be outrageous. But
Right.
and again, you got to look at everyone's circumstances. But I think as a general rule of thumb, if you're renting, buy a house. There's no reason at this point, if you can afford rent, you should be able to afford a home.
Right. Yeah.
Because the rent, you're probably paying more living in the place you're living for rent than you would be for a mortgage of that exact same house. So that's the easy, right off the top one.
And well, another thing to consider too is like, okay, well, and not to rush people into a decision or anything here, but if the interest rates have risen 100% in 3 months, like, well, what are things going to look like in a year or two from now? Like, could we go back up to those? That's my thought. As it's like, I'm not so much thinking, okay, are these things going to go back down to the 2-3% interest rates? What if by next year they're 11%?
Yeah, outrageous.
So that's something to kind of keep in mind too. It's tough to know where exactly we're going to end up with all this and how things are going to pan out. But we do know that they have indicated that they're going to raise interest rates, that they've been low for too long. long, and they're going to raise them. To what? That remains to be seen. But I don't think they're going to be returning to the 2 and 3% that we.
No, and maybe they get down to 4 again or something, or maybe they get into 3s. Just refinance.
Right. That was
If you're
another.
gonna live in the house long term, but
Yep.
here's the other thing: most people aren't even living in the house for that long. Most people aren't even living in the house for that long.
Right.
2, 3, 4 years. So
If you get into your home and you got a higher interest rate, and then you live there for a few years, pay off some of the mortgage, interest rates end up back down in that super low 2-3%. Just refinance. If
go
you
buy the
plan
bigger
on-
house.
If you plan on staying there a longer period of time, refinance. If not, heck, maybe it's a good time to move again if those 2-3% interest rates creep back up. So,
Well, then the other thing to consider is you're getting yourself in the game.
right.
So yeah, you might pay an extra bit for the interest, right? Because now it goes from your payment was $1,000 to $1,150, $1,200, $1,100, whatever it is, whatever the interest rate's at,
Yep.
versus what you maybe could have got it for.
I think it was Warren Buffett. And correct me if I'm wrong here, Ted, but I believe he said something to the effect of the only mistake you can make in investing is not being a part of the market.
Oh.
Really? It's and we'll have to double check and make sure of that, but I believe it was him that said that. If you're not part of the market, if you're not building equity, and you're just throwing money away on rent every year, you're making a mistake, and you should begin to start taking the steps, even with interest rates at 5%, to start building equity and becoming a part of the housing market.
So another thing to think about too is, like my point is, let's say the difference between you buying at 4% and 5% is about 10% in your payment. So if your payment's $1,000 and now it's $1,100, if your alternative is renting for $1,200 a month, and you're going to try to wait until interest rates go down so you can realize the savings of $100 a month, here's the problem: you could likely miss out on the equity building of that house. So one, right off the top there. But then two, after 3 months of paying rent, that's like 3 years of paying interest that you get to write off. You get to write off the house taxes. You're not ahead at all. You're behind the 8 ball.
Right.
And then in that same idea is missing out on the equity building, thinking that I'm waiting for the interest rates to go down, or I'm going to wait for the market to bottom out. It's just not happening. So our advice is, if you're renting, you're still wanting to buy a house while the interest rates have ticked up, I wouldn't let them scare you, because they could get a whole lot worse, and they have been when you look at it relative to what the markets have done over the years. So a couple more things to talk about is what we speculate is going to happen as the interest rates go up.
Right.
So what I'm seeing, and this is what I'm thinking, Kyle, and you can counterpoint me or agree or disagree, is as the interest rates tick up, you're not going to have this frenzied buyer situation where people are willing to make $30,000, $40,000 over asking price.
Yeah, I have a feeling that with the raise in interest rates to what they are now, I don't think people are going to stay as level-headed as what we're encouraging our buyers to be right now. I think these people are going to see this raise and think, oh my gosh, I can't buy anymore. And that's going to remove a lot of the competition.
Yeah, so that's what I'm thinking. So let's say you have a house and it's going for $300,000, and it might get bid up to $350 because there's just not enough houses out there. So if you're thinking of selling, great time to sell still. It might only go up to like $325. So then you're like, well, it's almost a wash at that point, because now you're
right. Well, and I think a large part of the reason that we're saying this is because we literally just experienced this earlier this week. Is we had a client who was interested in a property that I was convinced was going to go, $50,000 over list price. I call up the agent, an hour before offers are due, and they say, yeah, we don't have a single offer. And that was like a few days after the interest rate hike had happened. So that could be indicative of the market as a whole. It could just be an outlier situation. This is one thing that made us think about this, is that, okay, well, if you're paying a higher price point for a home at a lower interest rate, it's a wash. Like
it is. It's like a wash. So if it's the difference between like roughly 10% of the purchase price, so again, that $300,000 house, it's not uncommon that we could see it go for $350. If it only goes for $325 now, that's about the 10%, between the difference of a 3.5 interest rate and a 4.5 interest rate.
Right.
So, and then you got to think about too, your taxes aren't going to go up as much either, because when you buy a home, taxes get uncapped and they get reassessed according with the home sale price. So you're not going to be paying as much on the taxes either. And
Sure.
believe me, they're not going to bring those down either.
Right.
So in this instance, with interest rates going up. What it is don't panic. They're not that bad. 2, I think we're gonna start to see a little settling of the market. 3, taxes won't be as bad either. So at this point, with interest rates hovering around that 5%, yeah, you'll pay a little bit more for the house. You're still going to be building equity, assuming the bottom doesn't blow out. And I think you'll see the market slow down and not be as crazily competitive. So if you need help, call me or Kyle. We will help you get a home. We'll help you sell a home. And thanks for listening.